Hello, welcome once again. I want to continue reflecting on things that have been touched in the last videos with the toroidal field, torus. I've also been thinking about our own imagination and more specifically the limits of it. As I was noticing within my own imagination, the visions, I also want to point out maybe these things I've been talking about, this toroidal field, this torus, have been often also describing this in a static image, even though describing like you have a flow flowing through it. But the thing is, there is also this movement to that field. It actually spins at the same time. And then this kind of motion actually becomes more like a spiral that spirals in on itself. But that is maybe a great example of the limits of our own imagination, also connecting that with our own understanding. It's often easier, I would say, I guess, to separate these things, to look at it in a static way. Also, when we're like observing something, we may often actually find ourselves observing it in a static stillness state, or when we try to visualize something. Becoming aware of this is interesting as well. Like I notice a lot of my images within my mind are static. They're still, they're not moving. And then maybe we can take another example where they actually are moving, where we are observing the movement, but without this stillness element to that. Feels like we're missing. I myself like observing the stillness, sitting still myself a lot as well, because I feel like it brings a certain clarity to all the positions, all the dynamics that are going on. Whereas when we see it moving in itself, you're observing a different, what to call it, side of maybe also the same thing. But and then again, also connecting this with, we can actually bring these together again. These actually are like masculine and feminine principles, and we can put them together. But that I've also been noticing within my mind, how these images have that feeling of coming alive. I was connecting that a lot with imagining other people. Let's say we imagine an environment or whatever, or something, or like even just thinking about other people. Often we may have I want to call it right now, a reduced state of them, which again, also this static thing, we could say we take a picture of an observation of a moment, really. But it's like an observational moment. We take a picture and then we observe the picture, what's going on the picture. It's different than a film where you're observing more like the dynamic, the movement in it. Going back to this example, another person, often I would say specifically also like ego minds, we create an image of that other person, some kind of a photo, or like creating an image of who we think that person is. And then in our imagination, we are connecting with that person, but truly it is with that image. And now what I want to get to is we can, or also why is this happening? It is all depending on our own capacity to process this. And by growing, upgrading our capacity, these images can come more alive. They can, from going to one image, they can go to like multiple images, or like more detail in the image, or eventually the image also becomes like a film that consists out of all these separate images, all these separate experiences we had with this person, all the way to this person is their own living being, and it's like they can make their own choices. Imagining all their potential choices. I want to describe some things I've touched here, also using, I think, today's modern time, us having our technology of today, computers, like we can use these terms that we have actually, because we have created language, and we can use this to describe our mind and like these processes, like this capacity, we can call it computational power, really. And also, like I've been reflecting on, let's look at how, for example, our technology was showing these pictures maybe 20 years ago. Or you take like these box computers. They took a very long time. At the time, it was revolutionary, sure, but their processing time has changed quite a lot. And I'm connecting that with, we can have the same happening within our own process, or through growth, that our own processor actually starts to upgrade, that our graphic card starts to upgrade. Imagining these things like a processor, like having one processing like these bits, really also like, or how we in TV, how it was black and white in the beginning, and now we have like this high definition. And it's same also with the emergence of AI. Things are getting more and more complex. Also been thinking a lot in terms of like video games, like these other characters we could encounter in the video games. They, I guess in the early ones, they were very flat, or like didn't have much freedom themselves. But nowadays, I guess we are touching on levels where through AI, for example, these other characters in the video game, they can have their own consciousness, maybe animated by AI, but it's changing the experience of the video game. I want to connect that with our own imagination, how we can have a very flat type of imagination, and then also like develop that to much more detail, much more liveness, much more flow. But also again, what does that require? That we actually have the computational power to process that. Maybe having like multi-core processors, also thinking about, I was even thinking about like how you can briefly maybe overclock your graphic cards and through that like really try to project some kind of image, but also as I have actually like yesterday noticed this, talking about these things sometimes it feels like maybe I am overclocking myself a bit, and the thing is if we do this for too long you might burn out. But also, well, it's like a cooling element. We have to have the proper hardware and infrastructure to actually deal with all that computational power. Now, I want to then connect our own imagination, which is limited by our own computational power. Why even is imagination important? Well, let us reflect on how all of creation actually follows our own imagination. A lot of new inventions first started out maybe with a dream, maybe with a vision, and really thinking that through, maybe also going through the process of really bringing that, making it alive within their mind, and from there then also being able to bring that to this world. So I feel like if we are actually able to grow or increase our own computational power, it's interesting because here I'm touching on our own with this body, but also let me finish the sentence, that this then leads to bigger visions, more complexity, more, but also I guess a different quality of creations that we can eventually create. And I want to also let's notice here that I said my own within the body, I guess, but it's also what are we observing externally. Our technology has been on the rise quite rapidly, I would say. These computers, it's making new things possible, especially now, I would say, also with AI. Things can go really fast, and there it can also get really interesting. In some way, I would also connect that with it's how it's actually giving us a sort of an evolutionary pressure to keep up ourselves. We have quantum computers externally. What about internally? Surely this is, but we have to grow into that state, I guess. Don't want to go too deep in that because I haven't really looked too much at how this external quantum computer actually works, but well, actually, let's connect here that in this internal process, there is also the process of connecting the mind with the heart and the gut, and I would say even just the whole body. As often I actually also sense this in my own reflections and things like that, where it's like I'm experiencing it in my whole body, and like this computational power, this sort of a flow of consciousness flowing through this thing, it's like it's flowing through my whole body. Also, the grounding seems to be very important to actually let it flow through to the earth or make that connection with it to make sense. But mainly connecting the mind with the heart and the gut, and actually from that we can find a way to make, without going into it how to do that right now, but we can let them all work together instead of separate things, and then they also become like more of a supercomputer. Well, maybe let's get into that. Sometimes I guess, or before such a state, it's like the mind says this and the heart may say that, and then the gut is like all tense because of our food maybe as well, or stress. They're like more conflicting signals, and in a way, but unifying them is really the alchemical process of letting them also be conflicted if they are, but at the same time learning to listen to all of them at the same time. Don't want to get too I really just want to stick to the point right now, how we can definitely upgrade our own internal computer or processor or thinking capacity or computational power, and from that, like all our creations really, but also again connecting that with our own experience of life, it all, but because we are also using this to process life itself. Connected with that, I was also thinking about this thing, memory. In our computers, we have different kinds of memory, maybe also like a more SSD or whatever, but also the RAM memory, like the working memory, and maybe like a longer term storage memory. It came maybe from the question of what can clog up our own processor, because that is tied in with how can we actually open up our processor, which allows us to process more. And there it became, I had to think about when we want to remember something. It feels like we're actually holding on to that, maybe putting it inside of our RAM storage itself, like constantly thinking about it. I cannot forget this. But let's notice that in these kind of computer terms, well, you're actually clogging up or you're using up the available space of your RAM, your working memory. You're giving yourself less available space to work with because you are so attached to, I have to remember this, I have to remember this. Instead, we can let go. Let go of the things. Let's maybe also look at our own mind and maybe like a working memory. It's like we're reflecting on something, so we hold certain thoughts maybe close by to us, whatever that means. But it means the RAM memory, I guess, the working memory, because we're like looking at them very closely to each other. And this process of letting go of the things that happened in the past that currently do not matter. At the same time, I say letting go, but just like on your computer, this could be translated into, it's like you're putting them in the long-term storage. Or even better, put them in the cloud. Thing is, to be able to put them in the cloud, we have to have access to the cloud, or connection, or being online. Let us realize there is actually a cloud around us, an informational field. Could tie this in with maybe like an Akashic record or whatever. And so if we actually grow into the capacity to be able to connect with that, it frees us up. It's like you can just let go of these things in your memory and they're still in the cloud. So we can just like connect with them whenever they are. I also noticed that in, well, sometimes I could be consciously trying to remember something and then it feels maybe like you focus, you do this with your focus really. That's also important in everything, imagining as well, learning to focus instead of scattering it all, and the image needs to be able to be put together coherently. definitely tools like meditation, etc., can help growing into that focus and holding it. But I was talking about this connection with the cloud. I was also touching on this free flow state where you just let things stream in that fit the moment. Very much this already happens to a lot of us, I would say, where suddenly memories appear. And then we might think, why do these suddenly appear? Well, these things are not random, they are relevant to whatever you may be thinking currently or whatever is going on. And so then from noticing that pattern, we can find some kind of a trust of like, because let's notice this fear of forgetting. If we learn to trust that whatever comes in the right moment, then we don't have to remember like that and really clog up our own space. It also made me actually think about like how often studying in school feels like this memorizing it. Don't necessarily always see the value in that. I see much more value in actually being able to understand the information, extract the essence out of that. And the thing is, if we are actually able to do this properly, if we got the essence out of it, we should also be able to, from that essence, recreate the information itself. Now, that is actually tying in with a deeper level of how this own information system, talking about this toroidal field, how this is actually creating reality itself. It feels like this has opened the door now, but I feel like for now I want to leave it here maybe. Something I still wanted to touch on maybe as well, talking about the torus. I was connecting that earlier with the breath, seeing we can see like taking a breath in, expansion, then contraction, and seeing that whole cycle, breathing in, breathing out, is in a way like going to the whole, and then there is that reset. I was noticing these patterns, how when we actually hold our breath, what naturally follows is a deep breath. It's like, and I'm seeing that then within this toroidal field, like we're holding ourselves in that void space, in the 0 point for a while. And in some way, it's like building pressure, just like you're holding your breath. And then what happens is we shoot out far. And maybe that is a key to how we can take these further paths instead of these short breaths. But to be able to do that, we have to be able to be comfortable in that void space, in that 0 point space. Maybe truly standing still and reflecting on like which path am I going to take, but also again connecting it to the breath. Like, are we able to hold our breath? It could certainly trigger your fear of dying, things like that. If you hold your breath, or like, oh, I need to, or the feeling of like, if I'm not breathing, I'm not alive, or things like that. I want to rephrase this a bit as the point of how your one breath cycle often, not always, shapes or is a setup for the next one. It's like if we take a deep breath, it often can influence the next cycle. And then, feel the dog is barking, so I'm gonna end it here soon end it with this. Also, let's recognize that we can also reset that by taking control of our breath, for example, in this example, so that it doesn't have to influence our next cycle. But it could be difficult if you are hyperventilating, for example. You really have to get yourself together a bit to change that pattern into a longer, calmer breathing. But it can certainly be done, and we can then translate this insight from the breath to the flow of life itself, and learning to take control in that, and from there, like, more consciously choosing our paths. Maybe that is more for next time. So I will leave it here. Have a good one.